All right, everyone, welcome back. This is the end of the world with Michael and Stu.
I'm Michael.
And I'm Stu. And today we are talking about a topic we have touched on many times before, but have not explored in greater depth until now. That's right. It is, at long last, the cybernetics episode.
It's not how I thought you were going to introduce it. I figured you'd say, today we're talking about 2025 masterpiece, Stu Watson, Cybernetics and the Evolution of Philosophy.
Well, we're not, I mean, that will be one of the bases of our discussion, but
as it should be. We're very fortunate to have the author today of Stu Watson, Cybernetics and the Evolution of Philosophy.
I'm going to riff on that. I'm not just going to rehash my old work,
which is fine. Except I should let you know that the entirety of my knowledge about the topic comes from an article from March 24, 2025 called Stu Watson, Cybernetics and the Evolution of Philosophy.
That's not true. You've heard enough other stuff from me in the last 2.5 years or whatever. Sure. I'm sure your information is far greater.
That's what I say when I'm out at a bar talking cybernetics. I'm like, you wouldn't know. I'm actually pretty good friends with the esteemed cybernetics thinker Stu Watson, or we should say Dr. Watson at this point. By the way, again, congratulations again.
Oh yes, thank you. Yeah. Anyway. Before we get into all that, we should just touch base with politics briefly because it's been going so well. Mm-hmm. Did you see there was another press conference today? This is Monday, April 6th. After the rousing speech last Wednesday, the address to the nation about the future of the war in Iran.
And the Truth Social heard around the world recently.
On Easter Sunday.
Yeah.
The holiest day in Christianity.
Historians are comparing it to Churchill's "This is not the beginning of the end, but it is the end of the beginning." Yes,
or one of Roosevelt's...
You crazy bastards.
One of his fireside chats. I think this was... I don't know. It's almost fireside chat level, I would argue.
Yes.
But yeah, so... Trump has threatened tomorrow night, I guess, the day of this podcast's release. So tonight, if you're listening on the day of release.
Fingers crossed, as they say.
To obliterate the infrastructure.
Entire nation.
Which people have said, do you think he's going to nuke Iran? And what do you think, Michael?
I'm not sure he's fully connected to the words he is saying at this point. So it would be hard to say, yet in classic Trump fashion, impossible to rule out. So
yeah,
I actually heard, I was listening to the news on the drive down back to the city. I went away for Easter and, it's so many of these, the Daily or the BBC Global story where it's just these continually befuddled hosts and guests just being like, well, could there be some method to the madness with Trump's unpredictability? And, the one guy was like, but, it might look like he's crazy, but could it be said that perhaps maybe, like almost hopefully, like desperately, like, what if he's crazy like a fox? And the other guy's like, well, yeah, except to be crazy like a fox would imply that he has some idea of what he's doing.
I do.
Still to this day, these people still have to give lip service to, the level of unpredictability does it makes it difficult to get your footing diplomatically. It's like, but to what end? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like for what? What is any of this doing that achieves anything?
Well, Nixon famously pioneered the so-called madman theory. Are you familiar with this? Where he was like, well, if I act as crazy as possible, it'll keep the the Russians and the Viet Cong or whoever, he's the Chinese.
Sure.
It'll keep them on their toes because they'll think, oh my God, he's really going to push the bomb, and they'll push the button, and they'll back off, But
Yeah.
Nixon, whatever you want to say about him, I mean, evil guy, racist, bigot. The tapes are an incredible treasure trove of obscenity and monstrosity. Much smarter than Donald Trump, right? I mean, a much more canny operator.
I assume, I'm not too familiar with it, but I would assume that he wasn't saying the opposite thing every day, like same day, same hour type thing. You know what I mean? Like, there's one thing to be unpredictable. There's another to be completely incoherent, right?
Right. I mean, I think Trump has entered the Dadaist phase of his political life, right? Where he's literally just doing nonsense poetry every time
the scenes are just, again, like if it weren't so serious, it would be the funniest thing you've ever seen. He's talking about obliterating Iran beside a costume rabbit.
Yeah, I saw that
children's
today.
Easter celebration. He's telling children that Biden signed with an auto pen and that they could take their autographs of his and sell them for $25,000 on eBay. Like, what, where are we, A
little bit of personal lore, back in the late 80s during the first Bush administration, I actually attended the White House Easter roll.
Oh, really?
We were living in Maryland at the time, and my parents were friends with George H.W. Bush's ne'er-do-well cousin, Randy Walker. He actually sold them their house. And so he got us like VIP access to the Easter.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and we got to like go, and you got to, they used to be all over our house, a bunch of little eggs that have like White House Easter egg, little wooden eggs that are painted. And it was the first time in my life that I saw a president with my own eyes. My dad hoisted me up on his shoulders, and I peered across to see the most beautiful thing I've ever seen.
Breathtaking visage, yeah.
So I in watching the Easter Bunny thing, I had a strange flashback to my own childhood experience at the egg roll, and happy to report that, again, another evil man, George H.W., but nothing nearly so insane occurred.
I mean, when it comes to what he might do, I think that the most dangerous territory is sort of that all he seems to be doing. I mean, he's doing huge amounts of damage at great cost in both people's lives and well-being. Obviously, we don't want to sugarcoat any of that. But in terms of his greater strategy of, I could destroy everything, I can, take them back to the Stone Age. It's like, I think the most dangerous thing is that if Iran get increasingly comfortable sort of calling his bluff in terms of going to that level, that he might end up calling his own bluff, if that makes sense,
Yeah. I just don't even know what to predict at this point. It's distressing. It seems bad. It doesn't bode well for America, Iran, the world, anyone, right? And the idea that this is just going to keep happening for the next 3 years, pretty much, is one of the more black-pilling, kind of just realizations to dawn. Because you start saying things like, well, surely the next president can... well, if we take back Congress,
Yeah.
Anyway,
well, if the voters send a strong message in the midterms, Stu, it could all perhaps turn around.
Michael, I think if we just call our Congress people, that's right.
That's
probably the best answer, as we learned last week from the AI doc. Anyway, let's get on to the main topic.
Sure.
We'll keep our fingers on the pulse of the Iran situation. I guess we'll know by the next time we record what has happened.
Sure, or we'll be having this exact same conversation again.
Or we'll be in hell because somehow we've become irradiated by a nuke misfire that landed in Brooklyn. Seems very possible. Anyway, on to cybernetics. So we've talked about cybernetics off and on throughout the history of the show. It is one of my areas of academic focus. My dissertation was about the intersection of cybernetics and the 19th century artistic movement known as Romanticism. My argument was essentially that many of the ideas of cybernetics were in one way or another anticipated by the concerns of the Romantic poets, in particular Wordsworth, whose poem Tintern Abbey lends us the title of this week's episode, Flows Through All Things, right? That's the impels all thinking things. This idea of a kind of, I mean, cybernetics is interesting. It's a hard science, but it's also has a mystical element, I would argue. There's an aspect of it that you can kind of attach to more woo-woo beliefs, which we'll talk about in the second half of the episode when we get to Bateson in particular. But essentially, from its origin point, cybernetics is the study of information, and the idea that, you know, most of the events that happen in life, in the world, can be understood as exchanges of messages between, you know, the human body and the world around it through our sense organs, right? So sort of everything that you encounter in your day-to-day life, whether it's meaningful or not, it can be understood as a message. Now, not in a message like a schizophrenic sees meaning in everything, right? But message in the sense of just it's sensory information that is available to us for interpretation. Does that make sense?
Okay. It's like if you get a text, can you be like, oh, there it is, cybernetics.
Well, that's very literal. I mean, like you look over there and there's a wall, you know, and like that wall has features that the light reflecting off that wall into your eyes is a message on the most basic level. It's not a message that conveys any meaning per se, but it's an informational message. All right. Okay. And that life cannot, humans in particular, but also machines can be understood as these like sensory message receiving entities who are shaped not just by our capacity to receive messages, but by our capacity to remember and interpret those messages moving forward. And if you think about your life from a very early stage, you understand that this is true, right? Like an example.
Give me an example.
An example I often bring up with my students is like, there's a child, right? You're a child. You're very small. You don't understand anything about the world. You see your parent is cooking something on a stove. It smells good. You're getting the message, good food is there. You're just tall enough to like reach up and try and grab at the food, not understanding that in the process of cooking, the pan that is cooking the food gets extremely hot, right? So when you receive the message of pain from the burning hot pan, you're learning, in essence,
don't touch the pan.
Right. Well, but also just in general, like be careful about just the world. Sure. The world, there's the possibility of danger. You're like petting a strange dog. The dog bites you. You know, a lot of these messages we receive in a stage of life before we are able to articulate thoughts, right? So, for instance, we learn to speak by imitation. A parent says a word, you babble. Eventually, you mimic the word. There's a mimetic process.
Right. You learn to speak by imitation.
Exactly. Right. And we learn almost everything by imitation. Right. I think this is one of the reasons. Well, we'll get to this in more depth at the end of the episode, but this is not how large language models learn the world. Right. They learn by.
What's the difference?
Well, they don't have a body is a big reason why it's very different. And their sense organs are very different as well, right? They have an ability to like break down text into patterns and then of ones and zeros, right? Maybe something like that is happening on some level in our brains, although neuroscience is like the jury's still out about this, but there seems to be evidence that our neurons don't function as binary on-off switches. They have a kind of analog nature. Okay. That's above my pay grade. But in any case, cybernetics is a system by which, you know, we interpret the world. And the key element, though, is that factor of memory, right? So you reach out, you touch the hot pan, you get burned, you feel pain. thereafter, you have the memory encoded in your mind. Oh, when I reach out and touch the pan, I can get hurt. I don't want to do that, right? There's also positive that's an example of negative feedback, right? There's also positive feedback where, you do something nice, you're polite, your parents say, "Good, Michael, you did you held the door for Granny," or whatever. Sure. And you feel good, and so you learn that, you associate that. It's a very like primordial way of looking at the world. And it breaks down everything, like all living things essentially are united on the spectrum of learning through feedback, right? And machines, the most complicated machines, the machines that have access to memory, can also be seen on this spectrum, right? Because, one of the primordial insights of the cyberneticians was to realize that life can be understood as an unending battle against entropy, which is to say, the tendency of things to move from an organized and ordered state, a warm, energetic state, to a tepid, dull state, or in the case of to move from order to disorder, right? That's like one of the primordial laws of the universe. That always happens. And that
it is true. I mean, things do feel like they get a lot duller, like life, for example.
No, I mean, our bodies experience this, right? Part of the reason that we experience that is because our senses are less acute as we age, right? We don't feel, our reflexes get worse, right?
Is it also dull because we have the information or so much of it?
I think there's a part of it that's like that as well, right? That there is less newness, that the excitement of newness is gone. We become set in our ways. We become less willing to adapt to new influxes of information unless they're forced upon us, right? So cybernetics is the study of feedback, putting it in the most basic terms possible. Feedback meaning you send out a message into the world and part of that message you send out returns to you. Now it could be you text your friend texts you back, or in my case, your friend leaves you on red. But
I already apologized for that off camera.
But even when you are left on red, you're still getting feedback, right? It's just again,
you're getting feedback. This guy doesn't want to talk to me,
right? It's negative feedback. It's like a non-answer is still an answer. To paraphrase Rush, if you choose not to decide, you still have made a choice. Your hated Canadian brothers, Rush.
And then I see the feedback and I respond by getting rid of red receipts so I don't have to deal with this nightmare ever again.
Yeah, absolutely. Or maybe
classic cybernetics.
Well, or like it depends on the nature of your relationship with the person you're texting with. But maybe you think, maybe I pissed them off. Or I did something to annoy them. And then another part of your rational brain is like, they're probably busy, right? Or whatever, right? Yeah. And they'll get back to you.
Have you ever, I've done this. Have you ever told a friend that their read receipts are like on and they weren't before? You know what I mean? It feels to me almost invasive when somebody, when I can see that someone's read my message. I get less offended by a non-response and more like, hey, just so you know, I don't know if this was a mistake, but your read receipts are on. If you turn that off, I don't have to deal with this terrible nightmare that you hate me and never want to speak to me again.
Right. If you're paranoid, that is a nightmare. I guess I'm at the stage of life where I still have those thoughts, but I've gotten very good at ignoring them because, you said,
they've dulled.
Well, as we get older, we don't care as much. When I was in college and I felt like I was being excluded from something, I mean, it was a nightmare, But as I've aged, that sort of primordial sense of outrage and fear, really panic that, oh my God, my friends don't like me anymore. I don't really.
It's like FOMO. It's like FOMO flips to yes, I'm missing out. Thank God I've missed out again.
I wouldn't go so far as to say that, but yeah, I mean, it's like when I first started submitting to poetry magazines, for instance, this is another form of feedback, right? Are people's response to your art. You can think of when you started doing stand-up, for instance. Like, if I sent out a poem I thought was really good and it got like rejected really quickly, I'd be offended. I'd be like, this journal is...
Whereas for me, it's like, I had friends at a younger age get married fairly quickly, right? And in the early days when like a wedding would come up and I was kind of a borderline, do I make the cut? What's the size of the wedding? I would be like, oh my God, I didn't get invited to the wedding, like this big life moment. And now when there's like a borderline friend and I don't make it, I'm just like, yes, like I don't have to do any of the wedding things other than say like congrats after on like an Instagram post.
Totally. Yeah. I also know sometimes when I'm invited to weddings, I also just decline.
Really? Wow.
Well, I mean, if it's far away, I've had a bunch where it's like, we're getting married in the middle of a jungle.
I just leave it on red.
Peru.
I don't say yes or no at all. I just leave them swinging in the wind.
Well, you shouldn't do that because then,
I don't really do that.
They're trying to plan the logistics. Anyway. All right. This is all roundabout, but this is like actually what cybernetics is. When I say cybernetics, as I'm talking at the bar, as I'm constantly at bars, as you know, since I don't drink, but well, actually, I'm at bars fairly frequently for a person who doesn't drink. Now that I think about
just funneling non-alcoholic lagers.
Well, you gotta fit in. You don't want to be you don't want to feel rejected. Now that I've talked about how mature I am. In any case, when you think of cybernetics, you think immediately of the '90s use of cyber, right? Cyber sex, cyber crime, cyber stalking. And then, of course, I say this in the article, but like that arch comic genius, Elon Musk's brilliant Cybertruck, right?
Yes. A touch of irony, right?
Yeah. Throwback name for a futuristic thing. But in fact, as I've tried to argue, cybernetics operates on a whole higher level, right? It doesn't necessarily have to do with technology at all. Can just be a way of interpreting your existence in the world. And I would say that like the kind of response where you react like negatively to touching the hot pot, these are sort of like tier 1 cybernetic responses where you're like kind of learning through instinctual responses. But there are higher order cybernetic responses that we learn as well. So famous example I always use in class for some reason is when I was a kid and I was skiing, I remember deciding, I'm really going to go for this run. I was pretty young. I was like 5. And I was like, I'm going to throw off all caution. So of course what happens? I fall, break my leg immediately. And, in the months that followed recovering, I'm like haunted by that choice of like throwing off all caution.
So you're saying, when you're telling the story, you're saying that you did have a moment before where you were like, fuck it, I'm going for it.
Yeah. And it wouldn't be a useful story if I didn't, right?
Sure.
If you just get hurt in a random accident, that's not like, you don't learn anything from that. Right. But if you,
I'm saying you could still crash while skiing.
And then you could just say, don't ski. Sure.
Don't ski.
But if you have the insight, like I'm going to just go for it completely, no holds barred this time. And the result is immediate serious injury. Ever since then, I've been a very cautious person, like in all areas of life.
Right. Not even just skier. You're saying it then
I'm
feeds
saying
out
that's
into
a higher order level of feedback that sort of shaped my behavior ever after, which I think is exemplary of like what I'm talking about when I talk about like the way, and that there's a kind of Freudian dimension to cybernetics when you start approaching it at this level. Cybernetics is both very Darwinian, as we'll talk about in a minute, but also Freudian, because I think it can be used as a way of understanding your own life by looking back at these kind of good and bad moments that shaped you, right? Do you have any memories of like something a mistake you made?
I don't know. Everything bad I do, I just do over and over and over again.
Yeah, I mean, fair enough.
Like, oh man, I should really quit smoking cigarettes. Oh, here's a vape. Mission
It's a
accomplished.
cigarette. I think another one that I remember that's more positive is when I was a little bit older. I was probably like 8 or 9, maybe. I was living in Maryland around the time of the dreadful Easter egg hunt at the White House, and I have I told this story on pod before? Maybe I have, maybe I haven't. I call it the paradox of saintliness. It's kind of like the moment when my life was ruined by self-consciousness, where I was like coming back from the gym, and I just come to this school. I think I was in first grade, so I was probably like 7. I probably wasn't 8 or 9, and I was coming back from the gym for some reason. I like went to leave to go to the bathroom or something, and I was coming back, and I saw the principal of the school coming, and he was like touring a new family. And this is in, and I realized, oh, they're coming my way. So I slowed myself down deliberately, and then like not ostentatiously, but like very deliberately, like held the door for them as if to demonstrate how polite the students at the school were to this like prospective family or whatever. And the headmaster looked at me and was like very pleased. Obviously, it's like, wow, this student like went out of his way to be so polite. But in that moment of his recognition, I also recognized like how dishonest, like how like, oh God, I've like done this good deed and I'm receiving a benefit from it. You know,
I like the idea of like you're holding the door and the reaction happens and you have the moment and then you look at the family and you're like, this does not represent the student body writ large.
No, but like in that kind of moment, I think about that moment often because it's like, you know, you think about doing good deeds for their own sake. And why was I doing it? Well, I'm sure I was doing it because I've been trained to be polite, right? But I was also aware on some level that I was doing it for the benefit of like the headmaster's approval or whatever. So we have these little moments in our life you can look back on and you can see the way that like that memory becomes a kind of anchor point that you reflect back on and that maybe shapes your future actions, right?
Is that why you never hold the door for me?
That is in fact why. That's not true though. I think I held the door for you the other day. but this is like these are cybernetic ideas, right? Cybernetics is not just tech. It's not just you know giving the guy the robot arm or whatever. But let's get into like where this all comes from, right? So the cybernetic conferences started in 1946 and ran until 1953. They're held mostly in New York. And the original title of the conference was Circular, Causal, and Feedback Mechanisms in Biological and Social Systems. Beautiful title. I don't know why we don't just use that as the name for it.
Should have gone with Lollapalooza.
And you know, and this, as I said before, this is basically like the study of feedback, right? And but it's broad. It's not just hard science. It's also social sciences, excuse me. So you have people, leading figures from biology, mathematics, psychology, sociology, physiology, computer science, anthropology, psychoanalysis, on and on. Like this was like a meeting of the minds in the post-war moment to think about this idea of feedback and how it operated across all of these different fields of scientific endeavor. And the guy
this is to also help them communicate across disciplines, right?
That's exactly right. Right. One of the main goals was to develop a common nomenclature that could cut across jargon that dominates in different areas, right? So Warren McCulloch, who's a neurophysiologist, was the chairman of the conference. And he was kind of just the guy who organized. He was the guy who like did all the grunt work of like pulling the different people. He had a lot of
like the Earl Warren sort of.
It was, yeah. I mean, Warren, a little different. McCulloch was involved. I mean, he was a very smart man. He did a lot of really groundbreaking work on theorizing neurons and like what neurons are, and laid the groundwork for a lot of advances in neuroscience since his death in the late 60s. But he also, I think, was a pretty sociably intelligent guy, so could convince a lot of people to participate. And some of the people I'm not going to really talk about today, but who are very interesting and who we've mentioned in passing in a few cases, include Claude Shannon, who whose image we used as the icon for our episode about Claude. Claude Shannon worked at Bell Labs. He was the guy who essentially invented digital computing. He was the person to realize, we can, ones and zeros. Like he did that. But maybe the most important thing to ever happen. He was also a pioneer in information science prior to this. So he was already thinking about like information should be thought of as like something that's subject to the laws of nature, right? Such as the idea of entropy. Another person, Johnny von Neumann, who, in addition to his work on the Manhattan Project, was a pioneer in the realms of both quantum physics and game theory, and one of the most brilliant mathematicians and people who ever lived. Like everyone when he died pretty young, he died in his 50s in 1957, I believe. At his funeral, everyone's just like, Johnny was the smartest person that I ever met. Like that was just Johnny. Yeah. He went by.
There's something very interesting and hilarious to me about like the smartest guy of all time just being named Johnny.
Well, he was Hungarian and like he moved to the US. Like,
so it was like, just call me Johnny.
Yeah. Thing? I think it was kind of like an assimilationist gesture or something, but yeah.
Cybernetics.
Maybe. Another important person was Margaret Mead.
Margaret Mead.
You know Margaret Mead?
Oh yeah.
She was a anthropologist, obviously, and did a lot of field work with uncontacted or barely contacted tribes in places like Samoa and the South Pacific, Indonesia. She was actually married to Gregory Bateson, who we'll talk about in a minute. But the main people, and later in life, she was on a lot of TV shows and documentaries. So you might have encountered her on like PBS or something like that. In any case, she's very cool. The main people I want to talk about, though, are Norbert Wiener and Gregory Bateson, who are the people that I write about in my dissertation and that I think are most interesting to someone approaching this material from a more humanities-based perspective. Okay, so Wiener was born in 1894 and died in 1964. He was the guy who came up with the name for the whole thing, cybernetics. He derived the word from an old Greek, an ancient Greek word, Kubernetes, which means the steersman, the person that steers the boat, basically. And he was one of these child prodigies. He graduated high school at the age of 11. And
sort of a Doogie Howser type.
He was basically your old favorite. Your Michael has this has come up on pod before, I think, right? But Michael has an iconic bit about Doogie Howser. How every episode is essentially the same. It's like, oh, this man has a nail driven through his forehead. Don't worry, we have our best people on it.
Yeah. And then what's this kid doing here?
And Doogie Howser walks in. He's 12. Is
this some kind of joke? Yeah. Take your kid to work today. What's going on here? He's actually our best doctor.
That was Wiener. I mean, he went to Tufts at age 11.
Wow.
His whole family had to move from St. Louis, where he was born, up to Massachusetts, outside Boston, because he couldn't live in the dorm, obviously. Right. Also, great social life, right? I always ask my students, I'm like, can you imagine if we had an 11-year-old in the class with us?
and he was running circles around.
Yeah, he was smarter than all of them. He was smarter than all of us.
And the professor, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, completely. And he graduated at 13, and immediately
took his time.
He immediately went to Harvard, where he entered a PhD program in zoology, of all things.
Sure.
But turns out he was incredibly clumsy. Like a lot of brilliant people, he was very much of the mind, not of the body, shall we say. Mm-hmm. I don't think he was on the Tufts lacrosse team, shall we say. There's an 11-year-old goalie. He just dies. In any case, he was terrible in the lab. He was really clumsy. He couldn't do I don't even know when. So he immediately he transferred to Cornell for 2 years to do a philosophy PhD. Never finished it. For a long time, I'd assumed he'd also gotten a degree from Cornell, but it turns out no, he never actually even got a master's from Cornell. Instead,
why bother, right?
Well, he transferred back to Harvard instead, and and then completed a PhD in 2 years in mathematical logic, where he got his PhD at 19. So he was pretty much the opposite of me, who got his PhD at 44. By 1924, when he was still under 30, he was teaching full-time, tenured at MIT, where he would stay for the next 40 years. I bring up all this because I think the fact that he wasn't just a mathematician was also someone who was like interested in like animals and philosophy is really important for his point of view on the world, right?
Right. So he has an element of the interdisciplinary within himself.
That's right. I think that's crucial. He says in his famous book, The Human Use of Human Beings, which originally came out, I believe, in 1950 and then was updated in 52, 50, and 54. He says, it's the thesis of this book, society can only be understood through a study of the messages and the communication facilities which belong to it, and that the future development of these messages and communication facilities, messages between man and machines, between machines and man, and between machines and machine are destined to play an ever-increasing part. Pretty, like, smart thing to realize in 1950, right? And, like, the examples he cites in the book are really funny. He's like, the automatic door at Penn Station is like the thing he talks about as like one of the more complicated machines that we'll encounter in our day-to-day life, right? And he's right, though, because the automatic, an automatic door, we see them everywhere. There's one at the grocery store. It's really slow that I go to. And I'm always like, is it going to open? Is it going to open? I'm going to walk into the door. And it always opens just at the last possible moment before I smash my head through the damn thing. But what's happening is there's a sensor is emitting a beam, right? And the human body interrupts that beam. And when that interruption occurs, the memory bank of the machine has a program that goes into operation, which is to open the door. Usually there's a secondary operation, which is if someone's stopping the door from closing, open the door, right? Like, that's it. It's not a complicated memory system, but it is a cybernetic system because it has a sense organ that is accessing memory when that sense organ is triggered, right? Sure. So that's like very basic level. Now we have our Roombas and our robots that are going out with Melania Trump to make announcements and, all these wonderful things that we've all come to know and love in recent days. So basically that's one of his examples, but he understood implicitly that like these machines are going to become more and more of a problem in our lives and we should think about our relationship to them, and that he understood humans and machines as being on the same spectrum in that they resist entropy, right? So he says a little later in the book, the control of a machine on the basis of its actual performance rather than its expected performance is known as feedback and involves sensory members which are actuated by motor members and perform the function of telltales or monitors, right? So that ties in to what we were just talking about, right? There's a sensory organ in a machine, and it reacts when that sensory organ is triggered. That is, of elements which indicate a performance. It is the function of these mechanisms to control the mechanical tendency towards disorganization. In other words, to produce temporary and local reversals of the normal direction of entropy, right? So what he says unites all living things across all spectrums is this anti-entropic capacity to use feedback to further organization, as opposed to using feedback solely to continue getting worse, right?
Sure.
So like if I learned from my skiing mishap that the lesson I learned was never have limits, and then I was dead by the time I was 10 because I was just going off cliffs, right? It's like, no, you learn from the negative as well as the positive. You accentuate, you adapt, you change, you shift, right? And he says that like learning machines can do the same thing essentially, right? And the large language models, which we're constantly talking about today, are an example of a very advanced form of this kind of learning. Different for a variety of reasons, but we don't have time to get into all the technical, last thing we've already talked about was, he believed cybernetics could be a bridge between the different fields. He says, as the difficulty of a physiological problem is mathematical in essence, 10 physiologists ignorant of mathematics will get precisely as far as one physiologist ignorant of mathematics, right? So if none of these people who are physiologists know any math, and a mathematician is like, hey, what about this issue with your, and they just don't know what he's talking about, right? This is a problem. And again, he says, if a physiologist who knows
I can relate to that.
Well, we all can, right? I mean, I know a lot of things, but I don't know anything about so many areas of life, Yeah. So you'll eavesdrop on like stockbrokers talking on the subway. And I'm just like, I don't know.
Or like watch an episode of Industry. You're like, I do not know what is being said right now.
Well, you can take heart there because the actors don't either. And like the writers barely do, right? They're just like, it's unclear if the stuff on Industry even means anything. But basically he says like, we need to be able to put these problems in terms that we can speak to each other across disciplines, right? That's his like goal for cybernetics. Now, before we move on, I just want to talk briefly about how he got to the idea of cybernetics, which is interesting. As I've said, Wiener's very philosophically minded, and he was interested in pacifism. He was a pacifist. And like Oppenheimer before him, the only reason he set aside his pacifism to aid in the military, like Oppenheimer at the same time, essentially. Like, the only reason he volunteered his services to the U.S. government during World War II was because of the Nazis, right? Wiener was Jewish. His family had left Russia during the time of the pogroms and stuff, right? So he was kind of like, well, these guys are trying to literally exterminate Jews from the world. I guess I can aid in like defeating the Nazis. Interestingly, though, once that was accomplished, they were like, well, the Reds are after us, Wiener. Wiener's like, yeah, I got to go. He refused to help during the Cold War, which I think just because he actually stuck to his ideological principles, unlike a certain Cillian Murphy character in a film we talked about not too long ago. In any case, he was working on the problem of anti-aircraft fire, and the problem with shooting at a plane is that the plane's moving, so you kind of have to shoot where the plane's going to be, right? You don't just shoot where it is, because if the rocket or whatever you're shooting is going to just miss, right? So he thought, like, well, what if a gun, say we're, one of those big howitzers or whatever, what if we could program that every time it shot at a plane, it could kind of record through a sensory organ the results of that shot and encode those results in its memory, thereby building up a repository that it could refer back to for every future shot that it took. So it could be like, oh, this is a plane coming at this trajectory at this altitude. I've done that before. This didn't work. This didn't work. This didn't work. This had the best results, right? If it could like optimize all of its future behavior based on the actual results of its past behavior, as opposed to just doing it purely probabilistically, but like developing a probabilistic model that was based on empirical evidence. Once he thought of that, he was like, oh, wait, this idea works for everything, right? It was like the apple falling on his head moment where he realized that these kind of feedback mechanisms were operative everywhere. Now, the second person I want to talk about is very different from Wiener. Wiener, the child prodigy who was at Tufts at 11, right? Gregory Bateson is British. He came from an extremely successful academic family. His father was William Bateson, who was a biologist, who's the guy who actually coined the term genetics, right? Oh, wow. It's a big one, right? He was like, what if we called this, are you with me? Genetics. And everyone just stood up and applauded and cheered. His grandfather had been a Don and later master at St. John's College. They say St. John's College or they say St. John's College? Do you know that British thing where someone will be
Yes.
named and it's like St. John is their name, but it's pronounced St. John?
St. John, yeah.
Oh man, I love that. That's like one of my favorite British things. In any case, I'll say St. John's because we're American or Canadian, American, British, whatever you are. All of the above. He was the master of St. John's College, Cambridge, where Gregory Bateson himself would later be a student. But that was the extent of Bateson's education. After undergrad, he was like, got that, I'm done. He left school. He like worked in so many different fields. And his parents, he had a really fraught family life. His parents were like, well, your father invented genetics. What are you going to do? You know, it was like that kind of vibe. His oldest brother was killed in the First World War. The second brother, after the older brother died, the second brother, parents were like, well, it's up to you now. Kind of like a JFK situation. And the second brother was like, I want to be a poet. And the parents were like, never, you know? And then he had a bad breakup. So he ended up shooting himself at Piccadilly Circus, like in public.
Whoa.
On his dead brother's birthday, when he was like in his early 20s. And then they turned to the third son, Gregory, and we're like, well. It's like pretty grim, right? Like,
yeah. No, he responded. He rallied.
I mean, yeah, he did it. Mission accomplished. He had a variety of different areas he worked. I think they were probably annoyed that he didn't get tenure, that he didn't, get a PhD and get a tenured job somewhere and settle down in the proper British manner. But that wasn't for him. He did a lot of different things. He did field work in the South Pacific in the 30s, and he only left because World War II broke out. He also did work on linguistics, and he worked in mental hospitals with schizophrenic patients, trying to theorize like what was the reason for schizophrenia. Not something you're probably going to get to the bottom of without neuroscience, but never mind. So by the time of the post-war period, he'd led all these different lives and had written about them and was published, acclaimed, well-known enough to be invited to the Macy conferences, in part because he was married to Margaret Mead, right? They got married. Right. They stayed married, I think from 36 to 50. So they were married at the time of a lot of the conferences, and they stayed friends after they split up too. In any case, he's kind of the guy at the Macy conferences who's had real world experience. A lot of the other people, I mean, they'd had experience in various areas and were brilliant people.
But they're more strictly academic.
Yeah,
right?
They were more traditionally academic, and he is a little bit more of a wild card. And you can kind of see that when you read the conference transcripts. Only a few of the conference transcripts survive. I'm not sure why they didn't hire a stenographer to do the whole thing, or if they did, they like left them somewhere.
Forgot one discipline.
Well, it just like it fell into someone left it in a cab or something. I don't know what happened. Yeah. Bateson, he chimes in a lot when these people are giving these and his insights are like really potent. Like they're talking about the brain with this British psychoanalyst who's built this artificial brain, Ross Ashby. He has written a book which is known as Design for a Brain. Sure. Which is a great title, right? It's like, I've read it. It's very interesting and very technical in ways I do not understand. But, you got to push yourself into areas you don't know or you'll never change. In any case, he's like, wait a minute, like, he has this eureka moment where he's like, wait a minute, the brain is one thing. The mind is something that is beyond just the brain. The mind can be...
What's the difference?
Well, that the mind is the thing that's actually thinking. The brain is just the organ in which the thinking occurs, right? And he says the mind is better understood as not just the brain, but as a kind of immanent structure that's partly in the brain, but is also partly in the environment that surrounds that brain. So he says, we may say that mind is immanent in those circuits of the brain which are complete within the brain, or that mind is immanent in circuits which are complete within the system brain plus body, right? So our mind is not just our brain, but like, the expression think on your feet, like, or like muscle memory. Well, your muscles don't actually have any memory. The brain has the memory, but there's a where do you delineate between the two, right? Sure. Or finally, that mind is immanent in the larger system, man plus environment, right? So that we like basically think of the mind as being just in our heads, right? And then our body is something separate. This is Cartesian dualism, right? Like, I think, therefore I am. And it's like as if our thinking is somehow separate from the bodily world, right? This is like the principal philosophical division post, 1650 or whenever Descartes died. Bateson says, no, in principle, if we desire to explain or understand the mental aspect of any biological event, we must take into account the system, that is, the network of closed circuits within which that biological event is determined. But when we seek to explain the behavior of a man or any other organism, this system will usually not just have the same limit as the self, as this term is commonly and variously understood. In other words, you can't understand a person by just looking at them in isolation. You always have to understand a person and their entire mental existence as existing within a world that is not only their personal mind and their personal experiences, but also the environment that shaped those personal experiences. Does that make sense?
And then can the environment then be shaped by mind, right?
Absolutely. That these two things are constantly flowing into each other and in a dialogue of feedback and response, right? And response to feedback. So that's like a big insight that he like had at these conferences, which is funny that like the outsider is like, wait a minute, we've been thinking about like the mind all wrong. Like all of philosophy is actually wrong. He actually says that. He's like, wait a minute, Aristotle was wrong. Like, and they're like, yeah, you're right. Aristotle was wrong. Like, damn, like you win, Bateson. You've defeated Aristotle at last. He says, one thing he's also acutely aware of is that like humans knew this before Descartes and before the sort of modern rationalisms of the Enlightenment came to be. That it's like part of the Enlightenment is the forgetting of like a more primordial awareness of this knowledge. And he says this, all these quotes are from his book, Steps Towards an Ecology of Mind, which he published later in life and is a sort of collection of all of his essays that he published from the 30s through the 70s. He says, anthropologically, it would seem from what we know of the early material that man in society took clues from the natural world around him and applied those clues in a sort of metaphoric way to the society in which he lived. That is, he identified with or empathized with the natural world around him and took that empathy as a guide for his own social organizations and his own theories of his own psychology. This is what we call totemism. So basically, like, primitive people believed that the trees and the lakes and the rivers had minds, right? I mean, like, think of the ancient Greeks. There's like a god of every object in the world, right?
It's interesting. Like, does that imply that like the rise of individualism has had a detrimental effect on society and the environment because of a lack of sort of metaphoric respect for it?
Absolutely. I think so. And also just the idea of individualism discards the fundamental truth that we are never alone. Right? I mean, to go back to Heidegger, who famously was a Nazi, did get this aspect of it right, which is to say, Geworfenheit, that thrownness, that we are all thrown into the world, that we learn language, that the language constitutes our deepest thoughts, right? When you're like having anxiety attack about any number of things, the language you're using to go over the possibilities of doom that await you is a language you didn't invent. It's a language that in fact existed before you were born. Isn't that strange?
Yeah.
It was in fact created by, wait for it, other people. So that like even our deepest individuality is in a sense shaped by a common communal effort. That is the creation of language. This is something that Bateson's like acutely attuned to and aware of. and that a lot of people forget.
Well, it's interesting to compare it to the AI situation, right? Which we talked about last week, where, one of the things that we saw in the documentary was that I think, I mean, it might not have surprised you that there are remarkably few people actually working on it, right?
Yeah.
They had mentioned something like 20,000, and there are only about 200 working in AI risk. And I think it's like pretty telling of like contrasting it with this imperative of crossing disciplines, right? Where people in the AI world just kind of announce all of these terrible things or these potentially positive inevitabilities with some sort of transition period, but with no consideration of any of the impacts and any of the process to get from A to B or A to anywhere.
Right.
And for, these people consulting, people who do cybernetics, anthropology, people who study the impact of joblessness,
I think some of those
retraining.
I think some of those are among the 200. There are some there are some philosophers. But your point is well taken.
It's not happening at
there's
scale.
like 1,000 times more people working on just getting this done as fast as possible.
Exactly. Right. And so you see all of this, like, it's the classic example of like using up the environmental resources to have the thing happen. What the person in the documentary, like, well, why don't we solve the environmental problems first then? Why don't we get it to do that?
Yeah.
And part of that is because I think like there is this lack of respect for the relationship between the technology that they are now deifying and like the world in which, no matter what they try to say, like exists squarely within it. Right.
That's right. No, that's well said. I think another thing Bateson talks about a lot, he has a great essay that I teach in my class about civilization and like the end of the world, like the collapse of civilizations. And he's like, basically civilizations that survive are those that have enough flexibility. They have enough margins to be flexible. That a civilization collapses when it becomes too rigid to adapt to unexpected changes. Now, whether that change is the Huns coming over the hills with these fancy bows we've never seen before that can shoot from further, or whether it's, a volcano just blew up our main island. Like, what do we do? Or whether it's the slow, gradual rise of something like climate change, right?
Yeah.
And like the need to move away from fossil fuels, for instance. I think one thing that the Trump administration is an amazing example of is inflexibility, right? This refusal to admit that progress has happened, to try and undercut progress at every turn, whether it's trans people, kicking them under the bus again, whether it's trying to kick gays out of the military again, or, just like any socially progressive thing that's happened in the last 30 years, the Trump administration is guaranteed to be against it, right? He wants to literally outlaw wind power.
He doesn't like the way it looks.
And also that he makes all these outrageous claims about it. That's untrue. I mean, remember when we were in upstate New York driving up to Canada last summer and there were all those windmills?
Yeah.
Well, those are all coming down, I'm afraid. And you know what? The cost of taking them down, that's on the farmers that put them up in the first place. It's only fair. In any case, one last thought about Bateson. He considered his participation in the cybernetics conferences to be like the most important thing that he was involved in his career, and that the conferences themselves he considered them to be one of the two most important things that happened in the 20th century, which is a bold claim. The other was the Versailles Peace Conference.
Oh, wow.
Which laid the groundwork. Your one of your favorite themes, right?
Yes, absolutely.
That laid the groundwork, of course, famously for World War II, right? Like the Holocaust, the Manhattan, like part of his reason is like none of these other things would have happened without Versailles. And I guess in a sense, cybernetics wouldn't have either, because World War II was the impetus for that, but never mind. He says, I include cybernetics as the second historic event of importance in my lifetime, because I have at least a dim hope that we can bring ourselves to use this new understanding with some honesty. If we understand a little bit of what we're doing, maybe it will help us to find our way out of the maze of hallucinations that we've created around ourselves. So far, so good.
We're like, what if we make way more hallucinations?
Well, what if we have a hallucinating machine that we use to fire everyone in America? Continuing, cybernetics is, at any rate, a contribution to change, not simply a change in attitude, but even a change in the understanding of what an attitude is. The stance I have taken in choosing what is important in history, saying that the important things are moments at which attitude is determined, the moment at which the bias of the thermostat is changed. Thermostat, another famous cybernetic mechanism, right? When your house gets too hot, the air conditioning comes on because a sensor tells the thermostat, right? This stance is derived directly from cybernetics. And he goes on a little later and says, cybernetics has integrity with itself to help us to not be seduced by it into more lunacy, but we cannot trust it to keep us from sin. And I think that last part is proven to be very true, right? It's like there's the potential here with this new methodological way of thinking about the world and our enmeshment within our environment to keep us from repeating some of the mistakes of the past. But it's not going to save us. And
no,
he was right. It's just to wrap up, like, why talk about cybernetics in the podcast about the end of the world? Well, on the one hand, as I just said, you know, as positive and I think useful as these ideas are, not only just for understanding ourselves as individuals, but from understanding civilizations, group activity, you know,
how
just like
societies should be organized.
Absolutely. And I mean, we could talk in another episode later about some of the attempts to integrate cybernetic ideas into government, which have been successful and unsuccessful in various ways. But another thing is, you know, AI does come not directly, but indirectly out of this conference, right? I mean, these are these ideas of machines that have memory and can operate, and that's AI. Like that's the very beginning stages of AI. You sort of mix up cybernetics with the ideas of Alan Turing and the sort of digital computing revolution of Claude Shannon, and you've got the basics of cybernetics. And in 1956, there was actually another conference on similar lines that had many of the same participants, inaugurated at Dartmouth, which is seen as being the beginning of modern AI research.
Oh, wow.
And that was initiated by Marvin Minsky, and he specifically did not include Bateson or Wiener because he hated Wiener for some personal grudge. I don't entirely understand why. And Bateson wasn't a scientist. He wanted to focus solely on the computer science aspect of it. Marvin Minsky, also best friends with Jeffrey Epstein, went to the island.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Okay. He was very old, but there's photos of him and Hawking at the island and stuff. And like,
thank God Wiener's not here.
Well, yeah. Well, thank God Wiener's been dead for 42 years or whatever. He still hates him. So Minsky's ideas are the groundwork for, you know, modern neural networks and like the things that have led to large language models. Like, and one suspects one of the problems with this whole approach is the exiling of people like Wiener and Bateson, i.e. people that have, in addition to scientific rigor and intelligence, humanistic aspects to their interests, right? And there's,
that's you can see that pretty plainly in how little of a little consequence humanistic considerations are when it comes to AI, right?
Absolutely.
That they are considered completely after the fact, sort of incidental nuisances to be dealt with instead of, you know, the entire fabric of our existence.
Right. It's like, oh, copyright? Oh, what artists made stuff that they own? We'll deal with that later, right? I mean, that was essentially the attitude. And, no, ChatGPT does not have any copyrighted material in its memory banks. And then it's like a lawsuit just came out where it's like it has like every copyrighted thing ever. And it's like, so I almost think that this points us back to like a primordial mistake in the genesis of AI. That I'm not an AI scientist. I don't know what it would have meant to take seriously the ideas of people like Bateson and Wiener in pursuing artificial intelligence, but one can't help but wonder if it wouldn't have been better. Maybe it wouldn't have been, you know, maybe we wouldn't be where we are today, but we weren't where we are today, maybe that would be a good thing. So I don't know. Anyway, was this useful? Was this interesting?
I think it, yeah, it's great. I think at the very least, right? Like so many times we talk about how it feels like it, and they talked about it in the documentary too, the kind of race element to it, right? Racing to get it done at the cost of all these other things, that perhaps that wouldn't have been the imperative if we had built these ideas, through the cybernetics approach, as opposed to sort of the hyper capital individualist approach that, not speaking directly about the Dartmouth conference, but more about the sort of elements that make it so that they have to sort of get there first. And that seems to be at odds with something that prioritizes the consideration of all things,
Yeah, I agree, right? These things are related. Well, so that's a little intro to cybernetics. I'll put a link to my article about this, which goes over some of the same material, has some stuff about Heidegger, has some other stuff we didn't cover today, and has been well received. I think it's a useful article, so check it out if you're interested. Next week we are going to be going back to the afterlife.
Yes, it's time.
Barring catastrophe in Iran or elsewhere, the plan is to pick up where we left off. I think the last one we did was Zoroastrian afterlife. So we're still pretty early. We're still back in I haven't decided which afterlife we'll tackle yet, but we've got a lot on the table. There's a lot of fun places we could go with it. And so that'll be good. In the meantime, if you like the show, you can follow us on the podcatcher of your choice. If you really like the show, you can leave us a rating and review on that podcatcher. You could also follow us on Instagram at the end of the world, WMS, where we post exciting reels, highlights of the show. So Afterlife next week, maybe ancient Greece, maybe ancient China, maybe something in the ancient Americas. We'll see where the spirit takes me. But it'll be fun. I'm looking forward to it. And until then, this has been the end of the world with Michael and Stu.
I'm Michael.
And I'm Stu, and we'll talk to you real soon.